Okay, there we go. My name is Kelly Price, and this interview is being conducted for Honors 199 Inquiries into Contemporary American Civilization, Understanding Race and Challenging Racism. Let's go ahead and put a trigger warning up just in case, because we never know what we're going to get into. So, this interview may contain material that may be painful or triggering to some people, topics such as racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, transphobia, possibly war, drugs, rape, molestation, sexual assault, government, Congress, or possibly other sensitive material may be discussed. Today, I'll be interviewing Alexa about her relationship to anti-racism. Alexa, if you're ready, we'll jump right on in. Please introduce yourself and tell us your preferred name, major, year as a student, and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Alexa Shaw. I am a freshman criminal justice and criminology major, and I'm from Napanee, Indiana, which is like way up north, almost in Michigan.
Okay, what prompted you to sign up for a class involving ethnicity and racism? Did you know it was gonna have ethnicity and racism involved when you signed up for it?
I did. When I registered, I'm a freshman, so I had like help registering for my classes for my first semester. And Dr. Bartlett, the professor of this class, was actually the guy who like helped me with that meeting. So he was kind of telling me about the classes, and obviously since he was teaching this class, he really hyped it up to me. So I was like, "Hey, that sounds really interesting." So I decided to sign up for it.
That's really cool. That's helpful, huh? Were you surprised or disappointed in any of the topics discussed in class?
No, I thought it was really interesting how we just kind of took a closer look at different things from like different angles than we might normally think about them. I thought that was really interesting, so I really enjoyed this class.
What part did you find most interesting?
I thought, as a criminal justice major, I really liked our discussion on like welfare and how it relates to mass incarceration, and that's kind of like a balance thing. That was one of my favorite conversations.
What do you think about the switching of the name to hyper incarceration to try to make it more inclusive?
Yeah, I thought that was really good because mass incarceration gives the impression that we're like incarcerating a huge percentage of the American population, which is not actually what's true. It's just that there are a lot of people being incarcerated that might not need to be.
What topic did you learn the most from?
The topic I learned the most from was when we talked about housing and redlining, because I had absolutely no idea that that was a thing. So that was one of the most interesting topics and one that I learned the most from.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about when you look around your own neighborhood and like, I don't see any Black people whatsoever or anybody other than white people.
Mm-hmm.
What topic was the hardest for you and why?
Um, I think probably the one about redlining, just because I had no idea what it was about. And like, even after we read all of our readings for that discussion and had the discussion, I was still a little bit like fuzzy. So I kind of reread everything and it made a bit more sense. But that one, definitely, I had to work hard to understand it.
Now that you've had the full course, would you recommend it to friends?
I would. I mean, I think about things so differently than I used to. And it's just kind of changed the way that I view things. And also, when people try and like say racist things that they may not think are racist, I know how to like correct them.
How many of those conversations have you had since this class?
Not a lot, just because I don't really like engage because my parents are the people that I would talk to the most, and I live under their roof, and I don't want to make them mad, and they would get very mad if I started talking about racism to them. But I do talk to my friends a lot about the stuff we talk about in this class.
Go ahead and dig a little bit into your background and personal experiences involving ethnicity, diversity, and anti-racism. We'll start with your childhood. What was your neighborhood and hometown like growing up?
My Napanee is a really small town and it's very exclusive. So it's mostly white people and they all have their friends. And usually, if you're not like, if your family has not been here for generations, it's really hard to fit in. And I'm an immigrant and I have not lived here, and my parents didn't live here when they were growing up. So it's been kind of hard in that regard because it's very exclusive. But we have a really good school district. So that was fun. And I was heavily involved in band in like school and stuff, so that kind of helped me fit in a little bit more. But yeah, my hometown is kind of exclusive.
So it was a little closed off for people who didn't grow up there and whatnot.
Yeah.
Was your school very diverse?
Not really. I think kind of the school zoning put a lot of white people at my school. There's a lot of Hispanic people in my area as well, not very many Black people, but a lot of Hispanic people. And they kind of got funneled to one of the schools in the town over, the Goshen High School. And so my high school was mostly white people.
So while you were growing up, did you ever really think about race?
Not really, other than what my parents saw and whatever Fox News was talking about, which is not usually good.
What all did you hear about race growing up?
Pretty basic like racist things from my parents, like pitying Black people, and like my dad thinks that all Black people want to do crime and they like that kind of lifestyle. So that's kind of what I grew up hearing. And then obviously my school has a very like whitewashed history course and things like that. So
What about other family members for like, say, gatherings or um, any type of get-togethers? Did you ever hear any type of racist talk then?
um pretty much the same things that my parents would talk about. My whole family's pretty conservative, so
What about anti-racism? Did you have the wayward aunt or uncle that would combat any of it?
kind of. I have like one uncle that him and my aunt are pretty progressive, but other than that, not really. And they never really talk about anything like that when we have family gatherings, just because then everyone else would be attacking them.
Yeah, that'd definitely be a bit of a rough environment. Maybe the turkey goes flying
Yeah.
and grandma's cussing.
It did happen at Christmas one year, and my dad didn't talk to his brother for like a year, so it was wild.
What about at school in elementary? Did you ever hear anything about race then from other students?
Not really. No. We had like one Black kid in my whole grade, like all the way up through high school. So nobody ever really talked about race.
While you were growing up, were you ever taught anything about different cultures and ethnicities as far as inclusiveness? Did your parents ever try to talk to you about being inclusive at all?
They did. Like they definitely encourage like be friends with everyone you meet. It's okay if somebody doesn't agree with you, still be friends with them. They don't really practice that, but that's what they kind of preach to me, so that's what I do. So it's kind of a weird disconnect, but yeah.
So they kind of regurgitated what they had learned and didn't quite understand it.
No, yeah.
You said your school had a pretty whitewashed history. Did you ever hear about, say, Black inventors or women trailblazers, anything like that?
Not really. No, whenever we learned about history, there was no mention of how like founding fathers owned enslaved people, there wasn't really any talk of that. It was just like, these men were great. And then there was also slavery. And then we had the Civil War, and then civil rights, and then after that, racism was gone. And so there wasn't really any talk about like Black trailblazers.
Let's go ahead and talk directly about race and anti-racism. This can relate to any point in time in your life. When was the very first time that you noticed race? How old were you and what was your experience?
Honestly, I didn't really start paying attention to things like race until over the summer, when it definitely became a lot more heated. Just because like I was growing up and I didn't really pay attention to that kind of stuff as a 15-year-old. Um, but yeah, over the summer when like a lot of Black Lives Matter protesting was going on, I started paying attention and then having more conversations about race and anti-racism with my friends. And so I think that's another thing that probably prompted me to take this course, just because I felt like it was incredibly relevant to today.
Was there any point in time where anti-racism became a big factor in your life?
Um, I guess kind of. I read a book last year called Chasing the Scream by Johann Hari, and it was about the war on drugs, and that whole book is about how racist the war on drugs is. And I want to go into drug policy reform after I graduate, so racism will definitely play a big part in my work and anti-racism. Um, so that's kind of when I started being interested in anti-racism, if that makes sense.
How are you gonna approach that school-wise? Are you going into any type of politics, political law?
Mm-hmm. So I'm a criminal justice major and I'm minoring in political science. So after I graduate, I am not sure what I'm going to do yet, but I might get a master's in political science or something like that.
That sounds like a really great plan. Have you done any research as far as how our government currently runs and trying to break into the field?
Not a lot, no. But yeah, I know like there are so many things that need to change, like police have so much discretion right now that they should not have. Like the whole stop and frisk thing allows for like racial profiling and things like that.
Do you think once you introduce some of these ideals, do you think you can get the government to kind of listen a little bit?
I hope so. I hope to one day be in a place where I can have that kind of influence. If Oregon can do it and decriminalize their drugs, everyone else can too.
Let's hope so, huh? What about other identities or social positions such as gender, class, religion? How did other identities shape your ideals, perceptions, and experiences relating to race?
I think being a woman helped me understand definitely our conversation on microaggressions a lot more, because like I've experienced them a lot about like I don't want to have kids and people don't really want to accept that because I'm a woman and that kind of stuff. So that kind of helped me understand microaggressions a little bit more. And I was also raised really religious. And so my church is a pretty progressive Christian church, I guess. So there's definitely talk about like loving everyone you come in contact with. And so I think I'm not really religious, but I think that kind of messaging has helped me learn to like be friendly and love everyone I come in contact with.
Have you had any issues with your decision to not want to have kids, as far as your parents or your church members or your friends?
They don't really believe me. They're just kind of like, "Oh, you'll change your mind. You don't want to say that. You'll change your mind someday." So,
Yeah, you definitely need support in that area. If you want kids, have them. If you don't, don't.
Yeah.
People are horrible on that. How often in your life now do you see anti-racist examples?
Um, Not a lot. But I obviously don't go out very much. But I guess scrolling through Facebook, it's a war of like back the blue, and then also like, hey, black people are people, treat them like people, please. So I guess online I see a lot of anti-racism, but not really out in the real world.
Do you ever get burned out from the back and forth on Facebook?
Oh yes, I delete Facebook like once a month because of it.
Is that kind of how you take a break and cope?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, now that like the election is over and the summer is over, it's kind of gone back to like posting memes on Facebook, but definitely over the summer and up through November, my Facebook was very heated.
And what do you usually do with those conversations? Did you usually jump in, stay out of it?
I usually stay out of it just because, um, like Ibram Kendi talks about in the book we read, you gotta choose your battles wisely. And I don't think I'm gonna change anyone's mind in the comments of a Facebook post. So I try not to engage.
Well, and you made a really good point. Like when it comes to your family, if you constantly, even if you're nice about it, if you constantly bring it up, eventually they'll just shut down completely.
Mm, yeah.
There's definitely a method and a time and a place.
Yeah.
What would you say the correlation is between anti-racism for you and any connection to the Black Lives Matter?
Um, I don't know. I think Black Lives Matter should be not like I wish it wasn't demonized as much as it is by like I have to watch a lot of Fox News because that's what's usually on at my house, and they do a segment like every week about Black Lives Matter protesters, and they just demonize the whole movement so that nobody pays attention to what Black Lives Matter is fighting for.
What does anti-racism mean to you personally?
Um, I guess anti-racism means that you are actively fighting against racist things and racist ideas. And for me, like, I would like to go into changing racist policy as well, which is another thing that Kendi talks about a lot in the book.
So you're centering your career on changing racist policies to anti-racist policies.
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
That is absolutely amazing. What do you think about Ball State when it comes to diversity? Would you say within the student body that it's pretty diverse?
Again, I don't really go out much, but I think especially in the honors college, like, I would like to see more diversity. Um, and I think Ball State's marketing does a good job of like advertising diversity. They've usually got like at least one person of color in every advertisement, but I don't know that that actually reflects onto who Ball State admits. So that's kind of a problem.
Do you think they're kind of tokenizing Black people?
Yeah.
Got like that one Black kid in every advertisement and a whole bunch of white faces.
Yep.
What about staff and instructors? Do you think Ball State has a diverse staff and instructors?
I think in terms of like sexuality, at least from my one semester of Ball State experience, like I have two openly queer professors, and I think that's really cool. But I have no, like all my professors are white, and I don't know that there are very many non-white professors. So I would like to see that changed and have more like people of color teaching classes as well.
How do you think the lack of diversity affects the student body?
I think it kind of has a snowball effect like like people might want to go somewhere where they see themselves represented. So Ball State might attract just a larger population of white people because that's who's reflected in like staff. So I think if Ball State would have a more diverse and inclusive staff, it would attract a more diverse and inclusive student body as well.
And what about the minority students that are at Ball State? Do you think it's kind of hard on them being in a
Yeah,
place that, yeah, has a bunch of white people?
and they don't have any professors who can like relate to them.
Let's talk about microaggressions. Have you happened to see any microaggressions while at Ball State?
Not very much. No, I don't think so. But also because of COVID, I don't go out very much.
What about in the classroom as far as like the Zoom meetings and whatnot?
Most of my classes are online, so I don't talk to very many people. And this is one of the only classes that I have a Zoom meeting for. So, and obviously, no one will be committing microaggressions in a class about anti-racism. At least I hope not. And I think Dr. Bartlett does a really good job of calling them out when they do happen.
I believe Ball State's had a couple of racist incidents. Let's see, there was not that long ago where the black man had came in and sat down in a different seat. Can you tell me a little bit about that incident and whether or not you believe it was handled properly?
I don't think it's appropriate to call the police on a student who wants to sit in a certain seat. At the end of the day, I wish the professor would have just let that student sit there and taught the class because I don't think it would have affected the rest of the class to have a student sit somewhere else. So I don't think that was handled well.
Do you think the professor would have called the cops on him if he was a white male?
I don't think so. I think he would have just run the class as normal and ignored the white male.
What do you think Ball State could do to make improvements for minorities?
I think make it easier to access certain majors. Like we had one student in class talk about how he's a CAP major and there are not very many people of color in that major just because it is incredibly expensive and there's so many like artificial barriers to entry there. Like it costs like $600 to apply for the CAP program, which is ridiculous. So I think removing some of those like artificial barriers would help a lot with diversity.
That's really rough. That's a lot of money to get into one program.
Yeah, and that's only to apply. You don't even know if you'll get accepted.
That's horrible. What advice would you give to anyone who's looking to learn more about activism or anti-racism?
I would say read books about it. There's 1,000,001 books out there, especially now, about anti-racism. And with the internet, it's so easy to educate yourself. So just do it. But also, it's like watch things that make you mad, like Fox News, and understand their argument so that you can figure out how to argue with that argument.
Fox News. Would you wipe them off completely if you could?
I I would. I I just like they don't have to censor anything, and if they report misinformation, since they're not an actual certified news organization, they don't have to report that they reported misinformation. And I think that's really harmful. I think popular news organizations should be held accountable for misinforming their audience. And yeah, but I think Fox News is a better alternative to some of the other right wing news organizations that are sprouting up right now, like OAN and Newsmax and stuff like that.
I've seen those. They're worse than Fox.
Oh yes. They're so fringe that like they don't have enough of an audience to hold them accountable, so they can literally say whatever they want. So like Newsmax, I don't think has even declared Joe Biden the president-elect of the United States yet. And they can say whatever they want, and it's really toxic and dangerous because so many of their audience members are misinformed.
What do you think about the present day situation when it comes to the news outlets? How do you think the news are doing when it comes to fighting misinformation?
Um, I think some news organizations do it better than others. Obviously, like if they're a certified news organization, they have to like report if they said something wrong and it misinformed their viewers, which is something that all news organizations should have to do. So yeah, I think some definitely do a better job than others.
How about the host or the anchors for these media outlets? Have you checked up into any of their backgrounds?
Um, Not really. No.
I've noticed that Tucker Carlson, I did a little bit of digging into him, and it turns out that he said some really nasty things about women. Um, you would think that they wouldn't be allowed to have any talk time on the air.
Yeah. And Tucker Carlson, specifically on Fox News, he does so many stories about like really ridiculous things like racist trees that are not like actual news, and they kind of distract from what else might be going on that he doesn't want to talk about. And he just like in other interviews from like 10 years ago, he's talked about how no one should listen to what he's saying because it's all ridiculous, but people don't listen to that interview, and so they take everything he's saying seriously, and it's really harmful.
Do you have a certain news outlet that you prefer over the others?
I read the New York Times quite a bit. I get their morning email and I'm subscribed, so I read a lot of their articles.
What do you do to fact check any of the news that you read?
I make sure that it's like something reported on multiple organizations, and also read the article instead of just looking at the title, because a lot of times if you only read the title of an article, it's really misinforming when you actually read the whole thing.
Yeah, that's really good advice. You see it all the time on Facebook where you go into the comments and there's like 1,000 comments going, just read the article. You didn't
Yeah.
read the article.
Yeah, someone will share an article with a title that they like, but they won't have read it, and it actually goes against what they wanted to say.
What do you think will happen with the presidency? Do you think Trump will continue to try to push lawsuits?
Yes, I think he will. And I think all of his followers will go with him, which is really dangerous because he's undermining the integrity of America's elections, which is really dangerous.
Did you happen to keep track of any of his speeches where he was spouting off some racist nonsense?
I didn't watch very many of his speeches, but I know that he talks about how systemic racism doesn't exist and racism is gone, and it's just ridiculous. And there's so many, and nobody fact checks him, and there's so many easy ways to disprove him, but all of his followers just think that he's preaching the gospel.
Do you think that our president or government officials should be allowed to just say whatever they want with no consequences because of free speech?
Um, I don't think they should, and I don't think it was really an issue before Donald Trump because presidents had to have some level of decorum because they're the president of the United States. And I think Donald Trump kind of threw that out the window. And so it's never really, I don't know that it's been this big of an issue before, that presidents refine their speech and make sure what they're saying is factual.
What do you think's gonna happen with, say, the economy and society relations once Trump is out of office?
I really hope that Joe Biden does a better job of like making the economy something that works for everyone instead of just the upper class. And I think some of the cabinet picks, I don't really know any of them specifically, but I think a lot of his cabinet picks are pretty progressive, and I think that will help a lot with anti-racist policies under his administration.
What would you like to see happen in the future when it comes to anti-racist policies?
I think a lot of education reform is important, and also obviously ending things like the war on drugs and three strikes policies and a lot of things that lead to hyper incarceration, because there's no reason we should have as many people in jail as we do today, and there's no reason there should be such an alarmingly high number of people of color in jail compared to white people when you compare that to like the outside population.
Say you had a magic wand that you could wave and just change all the way through. What would you do for policies, educations? What changes would you make?
Um, Pretty much everything I just said, and oh, so much. Definitely all of the housing things that we talked about, like I said earlier. Um, and then ending the war on drugs and creating a more equitable society and like a larger safety net at the bottom of society so that we don't have a ridiculous amount of poor people.
When it comes to ending the war on drugs, what would you do for people that are already in jail?
I would say if they were incarcerated for purely drug use related offenses that didn't hurt anybody, they should definitely be let out of jail. Non-violent criminals are not people who should be in jail. They're people who should be in like therapy, because being incarcerated does nothing to help the actual issue of why you got incarcerated.
What about education reform? What kind of education reform would you do?
I think not teaching nationalism in schools is important, because you have so many people who grow up and they're afraid to criticize America and American policies because they were taught that America is great and it's the most wonderful country on earth. And also like including a more diverse narrative of history in history classes, um, to talk about like women trailblazers and black trailblazers and things like that.
That sounds really great. It'd be nice to see some type of reform going on. Do you think you'll ever see this level of reform that we're talking about? Do you think you'll ever see it in your lifetime?
I don't know. I really hope so. And I think if the right people are in power, it might be okay. It might happen. Um, but to get, like we talked about in class, I think last week, to get everyone in the United States on board with an anti racist education and stuff like that would be very hard, because there are still so many people who are racist. Um, but I think racism is kind of like a lot more concentrated in older generations. So as they begin to like age out of power and the general population, anti-racist policies might become more likely to happen.
What's your plans after Ball State? I know you said you're gonna pursue the anti-racist policies. Do you plan to stay at Ball State and pursue a master's or go somewhere else?
I'm not sure exactly. I'm a Canadian citizen, and education there is a whole lot cheaper than it is here. So I'm kind of thinking about pursuing a master's degree there, but it also just depends on what my life looks like in 3 years.
You mentioned a few times that you're an immigrant. What's that like, um, being here in the current environment?
So I've lived in the United States for most of my life. I moved here when I was about 3, but I go back and forth a lot. Um, and that's kind of highlighted about a lot about how American education is so America centric because most kids here they don't even know how many provinces are in Canada. And Canadian students know that there are 50 states in the United States and they can probably name all of them for you. And so other countries learn about us so much, but we don't learn very much at all about other countries. And I think that's really something that I've noticed is a big disparity between the United States and other countries.
Do you think that that lack of education that the United States has when it comes to other countries, do you think that affects the level of racism that we have here?
I think it does because it allows American students to think about America as like the center of the universe. And so that kind of just increases the level of nationalism they might have, which is really dangerous because then they obviously don't want to do anything to change racist policies because they think racist policies don't exist.
So we've talked about microaggressions. Do you ever experience microaggressions when it comes to immigration?
Not really. And I think it's just because I'm white, and so people just assume I'm from here. And so nobody asks where I'm from because they think I'm American. Like they might ask where a Mexican immigrant is from.
Do you ever, anytime anybody's talking about immigration policies, do you ever feel like they're talking about you?
Not really, just because a lot of immigration policies are pretty racist and they only focus on the southern border and not on the northern border, um, which is definitely race fueled because Canada has a much larger border than the United States and Mexico. So,
Have you ever heard or seen a news report, even on the Canada border, outside of, I can't remember what the show was called, but there was a show that focused on the Canadian border. Um, when it comes to people crossing back and forth, I think they were looking for medications and whatnot at the border. Have you ever seen anything about Canadian people being detained in the U.S.?
not really, no, but I know people do cross the border quite a bit because medicine is so much cheaper there.
Do you think that the United States should take on a policy that runs a little bit more like they do in Canada when it comes to medicine?
I do. I think that America's like economic system makes that really hard, but I think there should definitely be like price limits on different medication.
Do you consider the policies here as racist based?
I think kind of just because they disproportionately affect Black people and people of color because medicine is so expensive and hard to afford. Um, so I think that because it disproportionately affects those people, that it is a racist policy.
We are going to go ahead and wrap up here. Is there anything else that you would like to say?
Not really. I think we hit all the bases.
Alexa, thank you so much for the interview. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy college schedule to talk to me. Thank you.
No problem.
Have a good day.
You too.